likes history? Anybody like history? Okay. I love history. I didn't know I loved history quite as much as I do until college. And I did not enter college as a history major, but after only a couple months, I chose college as one of the things I would major in. I chose history as one of the things I would major in college. And I do love it. I love things about dates, and I love things about what happened when and why it all happened and how it all fits together. Condoleezza Rice often talks about history and about the fact that it's not just about the things that have happened in the past, but it helps us understand how far we've come. Because we often see all the things that are challenging and problematic and around us, and she reminds us, look how far we've come. And that's one of the things that history helps us see. So if you do love history, then it'll be easy to have some fun with this. If you don't love history, then try real hard to have some fun with this. And there will be some questions up here. Let's see if we can figure out what happened on these memorable dates in history. Number one, what major document was issued in 1776? Okay, we're doing well. Number two, the Roaring Twenties came to a close in 1929 with what event? Stock market crash. In 1989, what came down that led to a new era in Germany? The Berlin Wall. Good. What was invented in about 1440 by Gutenberg? Printing press. Great things happened. And founded in 1636, what was the first university in America? Survey says? Harvard. And now in 1492, who sailed the ocean blue? There we go. In 1928, Scottish scientist Alexander Fleming invented what? Penicillin. Right. So what do all these dates and these events have in common? I mean, what brings them all to the history books? It's the fact that they brought in a new era of change. Somehow, something big changed because of those events. You know, war and peace happened, or health was brought to a new place, or a whole new era of reading was brought into being. Because, I mean, so many things changed because of these events. So much change happened. There's a lot of change that's gone on throughout history, and I think there's a lot more change that still needs to happen. Television shows teach us that in about 30 or 60 minutes, a lot can change. Movies teach us in a couple hours, pretty much any situation can be changed. Books teach us that in a few chapters or a few hundred pages, anything can really change. And even though some of those stories might be a little far-fetched now and then, even though we may say that can't happen in 30 minutes, we need those stories. And we need them because they remind us that change is possible. Especially the change that's bigger than we are. Because there's lots of change that still needs to happen. I mean, there's global change that needs to happen. There's countries and politics and wars and issues like that need to change. There's hunger that needs to change. There's lots of things. And then there's also things in your life as well that they need to change. There's people that we want to change. There's situations we want to change. There's things that aren't fair that we want to change. But that change can be possible. Which brings up the question, can God do big change? I mean, God can certainly change some things, but how big of change can God really do? I mean, can God change the world and the things that are happening? Can God change the people that don't seem like they'll ever change? Can God change the situation that we're hurt by? That we've been hurt by a number of times? I mean, how big of change can God really do? Because I want to say, yes, God can do the biggest of big change. I mean, I want to say God can do any kind of change. And I want to prove that God can do any change. And I want people to believe that God can do any change. But if I'm going to say that God can do that big of change, I want to be sure of it. I I mean, I want to be certain that God really can. Not just say it because it sounds good, or not say it because I want somebody else to be encouraged and feel good, or not. I don't want to restore, I want to give a false sense of hope. I want it to be true that God really can get me that job, or God really can make that friend a better friend, or God can really heal this. I want God to be able to do those kinds of big change. And so it brings up the question, can God really do that big a change? The Bible talks a lot about change. It talks about people's names being changed to symbolize big change in their lives. It talks about nations changing. It talks about peace coming out of wartime. It talks about people doing things they would never do before. And there's this whole season, this whole flavor and style of change that the Bible brings up. And it seems to show that God can do and lead this kind of big change. Saul, as Jean Marie brought up just a minute ago, was out to bring some big change on behalf of God. His job, his mission, was to make some change happen for God. He was on God's mission to make some change. And he was probably the best person to bring that change. He was as Jewish as a person could get. He had all the training, he had all the heritage, he had all the people influence him in his life to be the leader in the Jewish community. He was as educated as anybody could be. He went through the whole system of education in his day, and then he went beyond. He got the individual teachers and the special teachers, even the best of the best priests that everybody else wanted to teach them. They were his teachers. So he was as educated, if not more educated, than just about anybody. He was also as Hebrew as you could get. His mom was Hebrew, and his dad was Hebrew, which meant he was totally Hebrew. And that was good, because he was pure. He wasn't part Hebrew. He wasn't 25% Hebrew. He was all Hebrew. And that was good, because that meant he is purely part of God's people. Well, he was also a Roman citizen, which even added a whole new level to this, because that gave him protection. That gave him security. That gave him clout when he was talking to people. And so if he was a Roman citizen, people would look up to him. So I mean, this guy had all the connections. He had all the networks. He had all the people on his side, all the ways to be able to make any kind of change that seemed to be possible. So you put that together, and this was the guy. Well, here's a little more background on Saul, especially how Saul fits into the stories of what we've been looking at, which is the story of the book of Acts. So if you will, take just a minute and take a look up here, and we'll get a little bit more background on Saul.
During the first century, when the Romans ruled the known world, a grassroots countercultural movement was born in the eastern end of the empire.
Yeah, it started among the Jewish people,
who for centuries now have been scattered around the known world.
But no matter where they lived or what language they spoke, they kept their identity as the family of Abraham, devoted to the one true God.
And every year, they would travel to Jerusalem for sacred festivals. And during one of these, the Feast of Pentecost, the visitors encountered a group of Jews who could somehow speak in everyone's native dialect.
Yeah, they were telling stories about a man named Jesus, who had been executed by the Romans. They claimed he had risen from the dead and was now exalted as the true king of Israel and the whole world. And this Jesus was now calling people to adopt his upside-down set of values and live under his rule, called the Kingdom of God.
And thousands of Jews decided to stay in Jerusalem and join the movement. It grew in size and in influence and gained favor with people.
But not with the Jerusalem temple leaders. They viewed this whole thing as a dangerous religious sect, and they even executed one of its leaders named Stephen.
It's no longer safe in Jerusalem, and so most of the followers flee from the outlying land called Judea.
And you might think that's the end of the story, but actually, this tragedy became the way the movement spread outside Jerusalem. That's where the second part of the book of Acts begins.
The scattered followers end up in surprising places, like Samaria, where their ancient enemies live.
Yeah, and Luke shows us how all of these unexpected people start following Jesus. like a sorcerer from Samaria who has to learn that the way of Jesus isn't about gaining power, but giving it up to serve others.
There's also a story about an Ethiopian delegate who, after discussing the scroll of the prophet Isaiah with Philip, decides to join the movement.
Yeah, Jesus is expanding his movement out into Judea and Samaria just like he said he would.
Which is great.
But back in Jerusalem, Saul is partisan. He's part of the religious elite who opposes the movement, and he's finding and arresting Jesus' followers anywhere he can.
This is a cruel guy.
But think about it from his perspective. In the past, Israel had turned away to other gods and to false prophets, leading to disaster. He believed he was protecting Israel and God's honor by getting rid of these people.
And then Saul hears that the movement spread north to Damascus, so he sets out there to find and arrest more followers.
So we see how Saul is on a mission that he believes is part of God's mission, which is to protect God's people from straying or from doing anything that's apart from the ways of God. His mission was to basically change people, to change these Jesus followers, these Jesus people, back and restoring them back to the way that God wants things to go. Because after all, these Jesus people were telling the story about this Savior that God was supposed to send, who had died and forgiven sins of people and then raised to life again. And Saul says, wait a minute, that's not how the story goes. Because God's Savior isn't supposed to die. God's Savior is supposed to win. God's Savior is supposed to be victorious and be in control and be a superpower. So that's not the right story. So he's there to change the story that's being told. But it's interesting that as Paul's going out to do all this change, that Saul gets changed. So let's read the story. Saul was uttering threats with every breath and was eager to kill the Lord's followers, so he went to the high priest. He requested letters addressed to the synagogues in Damascus, asking for their cooperation in the arrest of any followers of the way he found there. He wanted to bring them, both men and women, back to Jerusalem in chains. So Saul's out to change all of this threat into nothing more than just a misunderstanding or some misguided people. And he's on his way to Damascus, which is where he hears that these Jesus people are adding to their numbers. And so, as he was approaching Damascus on this mission, a light from heaven suddenly shone down around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. And the voice replied, I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. The men with Saul stood speechless, for they heard the sound of someone's voice, but saw no one. Saul picked himself up off the ground, but then when he opened his eyes, he was blind. So his companions led him by the hand to Damascus. He remained there blind for 3 days and did not eat or drink. Instantly something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he regained his sight. Then he got up and was baptized. Saul stayed with the believers in Damascus for a few days, and immediately he began preaching about Jesus in the synagogues, saying, He is indeed the Son of God. All who heard him were amazed. Isn't this the same man who caused such devastation among Jesus' followers in Jerusalem? They asked. And didn't he come to arrest them and take them in chains to the leading priests? Okay, so now that we've read it, let's see it just briefly. So go ahead and watch.
So he sets out there to find and arrest more followers.
And on the way, Saul has this sudden encounter with the risen Jesus himself. Jesus asks Saul why he's fighting against him. And then Jesus commissioned Saul to now represent him to Israel and to the nations.
And Saul is stunned and speechless.
And so he ends up in Damascus. But now he's announcing the good news about the Jesus he had just been attacking.
And no one saw this coming.
Totally.
So Saul got changed from the guy who was completely against the Jesus people to one who's actually for the Jesus people. I mean, a complete turnaround. He went from somebody who was a total enemy of them to a supporter of them, one who hunted them down to one who was encouraging people to believe in this. I mean, he went from one opposite to the other opposite. I mean, did he really have that kind of turnaround? Did he really change that much? Some people have actually said no. They've read the story and they thought, that's impossible. Nobody can change like that. So in order to justify that argument, they've come up with a few ideas. Some people have come up with the epilepsy argument. They said Paul seems to show indications of epilepsy as he was on the road to Damascus. He was thrown down to the ground, and when he got up, he was blind. And they show that there is strong possibility that Paul had an epileptic seizure, and so this really didn't happen in the way that is described. There's also the sunstroke argument, that Paul was overheated, and he was on this desert road, and it was midday, and so surely after a several-day journey from Jerusalem all the way to Damascus, that's a several-day journey, he was overheated, he was exhausted, and he was dehydrated, as anybody would be on a journey like that. So surely when you're dehydrated and you're in the desert, you tend to see things like mirages. And surely what he saw was a mirage. Well, then there's the psychoanalytic theory, and that's where some psychologists have looked at this story, and they've seen Saul's encounter, his experience, and they say, surely Saul is deeply disturbed on the inside. And they've argued, they've put together a very well-crafted argument that Saul, when he was in this situation, was so in inner turmoil that what actually is written did not actually happen. See, we read things about Saul, or Paul later on, where he describes himself as somebody who wants to do this, but he can't live that way. He wants to be faithful, but he ends up living sinfully. And they say, well, that's inner turmoil. Or Paul says in other places that we might have read, or I long to be at home with my heavenly Father, but I am supposed to be here on earth. The guy has two totally different ideas within him. He is in inner turmoil. So they say this story could not possibly have happened because that's too much change for somebody to undergo. There are lots of ways we can look at Paul's big moment, but it really brings up the question, how much change can God really do? Surely there's things that we can change. You know, we can change our wardrobe, we can change our diet, we can change the landscaping at home, we can change our schedule and our plans and our routine. But then there's the whole other group of things that we can't change quite as easily. So, can God change the big things? What Acts says here, and when Acts says in two other places this same story, it talks about one amazing thing happening. It talks about the fact that Jesus appeared. Throughout the Bible, when it says that God appeared to people, when God showed up, when God appeared before people, what tended to happen is that people were changed. When God appeared to Abraham and told him to go to another place, appeared to Abraham, Abraham's whole life was changed. When God appeared to Moses and in the burning bush and said, you will go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go, was Moses' life changed? It was completely changed. When God appeared to the people of Israel because they were obedient, because they were faithful, they were encouraged and they were changed. When God appeared to Mary and said, you are going to bear the child of God, was Mary changed? I mean, there's this trend that whenever God appears, some big change happens. And to Saul, Jesus appeared to him. And it wasn't a dream, because other people actually noticed what was happening. The people that were with him, they noticed this voice. They noticed something was going on. So it wasn't just an individual dream he was having. It was that Jesus appeared to him. And when Jesus appeared, something big changed. Of course, Saul's experience is Saul's experience. It's not a method to copy. It's not as if to say, unless we see the bright light in the sky, unless we're blind for 3 days, unless we fast, unless somebody else comes and lays hands on us so we're healed. This is not the method to follow. It's not as if we don't experience this, then we're not really changed. Because God doesn't really do the same thing twice. He doesn't change everybody in the same way. But this suggests that big change with God is possible. But it's not our change. It's not us who can make it happen. It's God who makes the change happen. When we were in Guatemala one year with our family, and we were nearing the end of the week of work that we had to do, we didn't have a whole lot left to do. And so one afternoon, a couple of the leaders said that they would like to take us somewhere. And we said, well, great, sounds good. And let's just say that my Spanish is good enough to get around, but it's also good enough to get me in trouble. So what I thought they said is, we want to take you on a tour of the city. We want to take you to the city center and take you on a tour. So we hopped in their equivalent of taxi cabs, and we folded ourselves inside, and we went on our way. We drove around for a while and ended up in a back alley by some low fences, and then got out, and then walked kind of around the corner and showed up in somebody's backyard. And there were some people there that they obviously knew, and they introduced us to their goats. And so we said hello to their goats. And they were excited. And so we petted the goats, and they ran around. And then we got back in the tuk-tuks, and we drove around again. And we drove to what seemed like the opposite corner of town. We drove into a plantation that looked like a banana or coffee plantation, and stopped at a gate that was closed and guarded with a man with a very large rifle. And they got out and talked to him, and he let us in. So we went in, and we stopped and got out, and again followed them into a backyard sort of area, and we saw more goats. What I realized is they had not said, we're going to see the city, we're going to see our goats. Clearly, I was not in control, nor were any of us in control of the journey that we were on. And a lot of times, we are not in control of the change that God wants to make happen. Because when it's big change, it's bigger than me, it's bigger than you, it's bigger than the things we can do. It's God's level of change. And if Saul's any indication, God can do big change. I mean, one of the ways Saul, who becomes Paul, describes this later on is he describes what this change might look like. And he says, anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, a new life has begun. I mean, for him, it's like black and white. It's like one thing to the other. It's like his kind of change. It's like, really, we can change from this to this, and it can be that big. If you're praying for that kind of change for yourself or for somebody else, don't give up praying for that change. I'm praying for that change for people in my life. I get discouraged about that change. But Saul reminds me that God can do this big change, because that's God's mission. So may we be strong and hopeful and courageous in praying for the change that God can do in us and in others. Let's pray.